Welcome to the Analytical Intelligence Podcast, brought to you by Enchilada with Alex Lovelace and Pete Hodge. Join us on a journey of data exploration, delving into analytics in business, generative AI's influence, and navigating the complexities of the data terrain.
So welcome back. Today we are going to return to the subject of LLMs. The last couple of episodes in this series we've been talking about LLMs for analysis, then how to use your own data or proprietary or private data when using large language models. And today we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls in doing that, some of the challenges, some of the concerns and general approaches you might take to, I guess you would call it in-housing Gen AI, and why that's a good thing you would want to be thinking about doing, but also why it's not maybe as easy as some people would like it to be. So do we want to start talking about some of the general use cases for bringing Gen AI in-house to your business?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of immediate one that jumps to my mind, which I think is fairly accessible for most people, is any sort of AI that you would have around emails. So for years we've all had millions of emails. Searches, a lot of times I've found very wanting on them. You're working on a project, you've written hundreds of emails over the last 2 years, and there's one that had that little bit of useful information, and you're spending 25 minutes trying to find that information. And now, of course, the promise is, well, you can ask the AI in a sort of plain question. Oh, it was an email I sent to, I think it was a guy, it was in a meeting, it was about 2 years, and it's going to come back and summarize the exact email you wanted. And I think we'll begin to see some examples of that beginning to work. But if you think about why that works, even already at the moment, and why it's a good use case, is because your email has, all of your emails in it, and you're there searching for all of the emails you've ever written. And so it's got everything that you've done, and it's all there, and that what you're talking about is in there somewhere. And then if you start to extend that out and say, okay, well, that's great. What about all emails for a project? Okay, well, now you've got 7-10 people on that project. Okay, well, so now they've all got to look in their email, and there are companies and software products which aim to try and deal with this. Basecamp springs to mind, where you sort of run your project and any communications on there. You've got Slack, obviously, which is there to say, any communications around something is all here and it's all recorded centrally in the cloud, and if you don't do anything outside of that, then that's great. But then, of course, you extend that to usefulness. We don't just want to know what was in an email. You want to know what was in meetings and away days and documents. And maybe there's some videos. And so, actually, we want all of that in a sort of project repository. And again, you start to extend out. There are, document management systems which aim to do this, which even pull in from things like emails to start to put it all in one place. And these aren't new sort of projects. They've been around for a while, they're there to try and bring all of this data together so that you can, then query it and have everything. And I think anyone that's been a part of one of these knows that they're not always 100% successful. And and there's it's understandable why they're not. It's a pretty challenging thing. I know people that sort of work in sort of engineering. You've got to bring in all your CAD drawings. That's a completely different kind of store, things you've got to store, and then you've got to try and access that. So they've got text in, but they're drawings. How do you get a machine to start understanding that? You're not talking about a few drawings. You're talking about hundreds and thousands.
Yeah. So we're talking about corporate memory here.
Yeah.
In the sort of in the documentation archival sense, some companies are very old, and there's a lot of content created every year: email, chat, documents, PowerPoints, Excels, CAD drawings. It depends on what type of organization you are. I mean, could be imagery of tumors or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And that creates a sort of a latent graph of information, all of which is sort of interlinked, and that you can see that at the company level, or you can see it at team level, or a project level, or an individual level, and any or all of the in between. As you mentioned, there's a few products out there that already handle whole large corners of this stuff, and you've got the Atlassian suite, you've got Office 365, Google, and then more recently stuff like Notion, which is more like a wiki on steroids, and that already has AI built in. PowerPoint now has an AI for building slides and so on. So the AI is creeping in everywhere already. Mail clients with AI summarizations on it, and really what we're talking about here is okay, that's fine on my personal email, or whatever, my little side project. But once you get inside the corporate firewall, the rules change a bit, and so there's an obvious need, and there has been for a while, to be able to bring the corporate memory back into play, so people can find stuff that's been done and said before. Don't reinvent the wheel, don't repeat things, find things, get useful information, and that's why there's a fairly unsuccessful thread of corporate search and intranet search out there. It's a nut that's yet to be cracked. And it's not just about making that stuff available. You can imagine having chatbots within intranets that allow people, new starters, tell me what our policies are on taking maternity leave, and just having a chat. And obviously you want that to be fed the most recent policies. But where if someone's saying, oh, have we ever done any projects on pig farming, and then so anything's in play, right? So you've got different levels of recency, and but based on what the questions could be answering. And so the person who wants to know about the maternity leave really needs the current policy, right? And policies change, as does legislation, right? So it's not just because I'm searching for maternity leave. Perhaps I'm searching for paternity leave. Hopefully I'm not going to be doing that anytime soon. Is that I don't care about the paternity leave policy in 1998. You know what I mean? It's not useful to me, right? Whereas I do care about that project that happened in 1998, because we did it for this company, and they're currently coming back in as a potential client, right? So we set the scene there, so we understand the type of thing. I mean, we could talk probably for another 2 hours about use cases.
Exactly.
And they're not going to stop. And this is not a genie that's going back in the bottle. The core problem here is that some of that information is deeply sensitive, and we can see a scenario more and more. There is desire, certainly with bigger companies, to in-house this type of thing, due to some sort of regulatory issue or mistrust of the centralized suppliers. I think there's a battle to be fought there, and I don't really know how that's going to pan out, but some businesses definitely will be in-housing this, right? So let's take where you started, email, as an example, as to something we might want to have, like an internal email search that works at multiple levels. Bearing in mind that email is historically relevant, i.e. it goes back in time, and there might be a time horizon you're interested in. So it's sort of a bit of a medium that every business has a lot of. And whereas I might not care about that PowerPoint presentation I made 7 years ago, I might care about a interaction with this particular client 7 years ago, especially in highly regulated environments like financial services. So what is it going to take? So I want then some sort of smart search for email. We'll keep it as simple as that, right? That's going to allow natural language conversations about either my email or I guess my project or team email, and I guess by extension we're probably talking about chats as well. We want to search that, right? So what are our constraints here?
Well, I mean, immediately at the moment you start talking about, like a project, then you're going out. So at the moment that data will be held under Alex and all your emails, and you'll have access to it, and that won't be a problem. But to improve that, or to increase the value of that knowledge, you'd want the project stuff to all be together. If we're working on a project together, me having access to your knowledge is useful, but straight away you've got a barrier there, which is whether your emails, and there's a privacy element there, and what can go centrally and what can't. And whilst if you had started putting those emails, manually or otherwise, storing them in a central folder, and you're aware of that would be fine. Okay, well, we've got a shared folder, we put all our emails about the project in there, and you've kind of agreed it up front. But then if you're going, actually I want to go back into my 5-year-old emails, which are all stored under my name, and now I want to chuck them over, well, that's or what, just give someone else access on the project. That's a question straight away. Well, are you actually allowed to do that? What stuff might be in your emails that maybe you didn't realise? So there's a whole question there, just along the privacy side, let alone, I mean, I'm sure it's doable from a sort of technical point of view, just from an email standpoint. But then you start to bring in, well, what if you're on a project? Again, you bring in the time horizons. Starts off with 5 people, balloons up to 10. People leave the company, new people come in. All of a sudden you've got lots of, you're signing up. You've got to keep track of all that again. If you start, it's usually much easier ongoing. But if suddenly you haven't been doing that, and you suddenly think you're going to get a nice search, which is going to search on this project and bring up all the useful information, there's quite a lot of hurdles there just to get something that simple working, let alone bringing in the broader aspect outside of email, your PowerPoints and your documents.
Well, which might well be attached to the emails.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Duplicated in multiple places.
Yeah.
In SharePoint or whatever. So the point we're here with is, if we've got, we're keeping this simple. It's just our little team that's going to do this. I don't think this is a good use case, but just to keep it relatively contained. We have to take all of that documentation, all the emails, all of that, extract the text from them, because emails have a lot more than just the content. They have all the dates and the email addresses, CCs and all that. Take the bits of it that we find important, and centralize them somewhere that some sort of infrastructure can pick them up and ingest them for use in an AI-powered search chat interface, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about here, we've mentioned before, called retrieval augmented generation, which is a way of taking a set of text, making it searchable, so that then that can be fed to a mature LLM that will then be able to answer questions about that. And so it's worth just a little bit of a conversation about how that process works, as a reminder, so we understand why we're talking about centralizing this.
Yeah.
This is not like Google. It's not like a spider that goes off and wanders around and grabs stuff and makes it available for search. There is an element of that, but the point that you need to focus on here is then that data needs to be centralized within a database that's very particular, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like when you type in, did I ever have a conversation with this person, right? That it's then going off reading all of the email in place in your email server and all your documentation and returning result. You have to have retrieved all that information in advance, kept it up to date, because presumably you care if this happened last week as well as last year or 7 years ago. And you then have to encode it in a way that it can be searchable. And that's done by a process called vectorization, which is a process that involves turning text into like a mathematical entity, what are called word embeddings or sentence embeddings that allow you to put it in a form where it can be used as a similarity search, right? So if you're looking for all your company's documentations on cheese,
Mm-hmm.
And you want to do that via a natural language process, you have to have had all your company's documentations about any subject, and then you can feed in your query about, what recipes do we have in our documentation that contain cheese and broccoli, and it's going to have to go and retrieve all the documents that relate to that. So you have to have a good vector database with well-formed, well-created vectors that can be searched, that then will pull out the text that relates to those, the cheese and broccoli, and then pass that to the LLM to answer questions on. And then the power of the natural language understanding and generation aspects of the LLM come into play. So we have the situation where this isn't simply, oh, here's my stuff. You have to have had some process in place that retrieves this, sorts the wheat from the chaff, as it were, dedupes,
Mm-hmm.
because there could be across like these 10 inboxes, they all got the same spam, right? Company internal spam, external spam, same newsletter that relates to whatever it is that team does. So firstly, get rid of all of that, then tokenize it down in a sane way that's valid for the language you're working in, and vectorize it, and then have that process working so the vectorization is kept up to date. So you sent me a new email. At what point, how up to date does that need to be? How often do we update? Is that real time? Is that daily, weekly, monthly, and so on? All of that, and this is all sounding very much like big data.
Indeed.
Right, and we've all been there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you've been there plenty of times.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, this is the whole sort of similar promise. And I think, the point of what we're saying here is we've got this new shiny generative AI coming along. And, there are definitely some great use cases here, and tapping into corporate knowledge is surely one of the great ones that you want. But that corporate knowledge has to be accessible. And as we talked about last time, you're not just talking about a model. You don't just put this data in a model and it gives you back everything. There's orchestration to go on here, as you say there. You've got to build your data out first, get it into a vector database, and then there are steps along the way, depending on the use case that you've got, depending on the questions you're asking and answering. A call center which wants to be briefed on sort of manuals and products and product questions and queries customers have got, is a different use case from providing a unique service for a large client, doing the 77th project for them over the last 7 years. It's a different level of different sort of stuff that you want to come out, to make your pitch more efficient, to get that service is going to be different. And so you're going to have different orchestration steps there. And so there's always going to be engineers in here going, okay, what is it we need to do here? And you want your starting point to be that you want that bar to be as high as possible. You want to already have as much good corporate data available as you can. So if you've done or some way through a big data project and you've done a lot of that, you'll know that a lot of it is bringing data from disparate sources, from different silos within the company. It's often the main problem because you get a lot of duplication, and also a lot of disparate data that actually, when it's brought together, can really add value. But generally, they're in different places. That needs to be brought together. You need to have provenance of that. You need to understand what's different, what's the same. As you say, you've got a whole changing thing of how often and when it's up to date, and the further you are down the road with that, the easier, well, not easy, but the quicker and the easier it will be to build your AI up from there, because your AI is always going to be building on top. If you don't have that, you're going to have to start doing that first.
Yeah, absolutely. It's additive, right? It's always additive.
Yeah.
This is not fitting in with your existing infrastructure unless you happen to already be doing it, at which point you're not listening to this, right? So and then you've got this problem that exists within any sort of big data lake type environment, data warehouse, is the permissions. And you don't have permissions to read my email or whatever, or we don't have permissions to read this client's paperwork, right? We don't have permission to see all of these things that you might want, and you can sort of think that these machines work best when they have a lot of things in them. But we have this situation whereby bits of that information might need to be available and others won't, and the machine is not going to know which bits are. It just sees a bunch of vectors, right?
Yeah.
So you then have to think about partitioning that data, and so that anyone using that bot has to understand the permissions that they have, only retrieve the things that are available for that person to see, and the flip side goes in terms of the ingestion process. How do you ensure that there is no pollution between what people can see and what can't see, and that the permissions that are either on the source data or can be inferred or whatever from where the data was taken from is congruent with what the real world permissions are. I mean, we'll make the basic assumption that some permissions framework exists via something like Active Directory or whatever, that there is something to work with here. We're not building permissions from the ground upwards, but we do need to make sure those permissions are applied to this same data set, which is a perfectly conquerable problem. It's just yet another engineering and infrastructure task.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get into all sorts of things there as well, where data that's gathered, and we know from GDPR, you should only be gathering data for the use that you gathered it for. And of course, one of the things that's coming along, we've now got generative AI. We can do a bunch of things which we couldn't really think about before. Oh, great! Well, we're going to do it on this data. Well, hold on. Did you collect that data? If that's not just internal data, if that's you want to go and do something with customer data. Well, are you now using it for for something which it wasn't collected for? So you've got that whole kettle of fish.
Are you aware you are definitely collecting customer data and PII?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
And as we know that corporate data systems, or more likely corporate sort of SharePoints or information hosting systems, aren't often completely free of data that it shouldn't be there, especially if they've been around for a long time. And there might be PII in there. It might have got in there through some other means. Data bleeds, right? It just does. People accidentally send something in an email. They forgot they weren't supposed to, paste customer email addresses. It happens. Honest mistakes. Nothing dodgy is going on here. Suddenly, that's ingested into and vectorized into your system, and because of the way that LLMs work, they don't differentiate very much with the details.
Yeah.
And so, any of that type of information goes through and it thinks, oh, I usually see an email address after I write this thing, it's going to return an email address, right?
Yeah.
And that could be anyone in your company, it could be customers, could be anything, if your data isn't absolutely clean. Now, bear in mind that this data is stored in vectorized form, so you can't just go and eyeball it, right? So you need to have systems that regularly check, or your ingestion systems have to be very aware of what PII looks like, where it might come from, and so on. And has this stuff leaked into your system? Because it could end up coming out in all sorts of weird places that could cause all sorts of problems.
Yeah, and on top of that, you've got the coming down the line is the European sort of AI Act. I'm not sure what the official title is, but similar to GDPR, that's going to start to put rulings in around when AI is being used, making sure that customers are aware and it's not just hidden away. So you're going to have to, bear all of that in mind if you're building out new systems as well.
Which, as anyone who outside of the EU knows, if you want to trade in the EU in any way, you have to apply these things.
Yeah.
And so, and that's going to bleed out everywhere. And honestly, in some senses, the AI Act has a bunch of new stuff in it that relates explicitly to this. But even if you just look at GDPR, and apply it to this enterprise, you're going to see already that there's a whole bunch of stuff that is going to make this difficult. It's no different from any other data engineering, corporate data engineering task.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It's just another data task.
Yeah.
And one just because it's easy to go to ChatGPT and type in a query and get good responses doesn't mean to say that it's equally as easy to implement this type of technology.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there are a lot of challenges here. I think the good news is that then a lot of them are, this is about data infrastructure and ingestment. This stuff's been knocking around for a good number of years now, and so there are known solutions to these problems. Unfortunately, they're not quick or cheap solutions, but they're known, and there are a variety of different ways you can do it. There are a lot of vendors offering it. So, if you've not started that journey, or perhaps going slower than you want, then there are ways to speed it up and get further. I think that the key point here is you're going to have to be doing it. It only means data infrastructure and the talk around data becomes even more important. And I can see, having watched the Apple keynote a few weeks ago, where basically they have brought in Apple Intelligence AI across, they're bringing that in across their suite. So on your phone, you're going to be able to go and ask it something, and all that natural language, and it's going to go and get an email, and it's going to do this, and it's going to bring up a picture, and you're going to bring up a picture with somebody wearing a blue t-shirt on such and such a day, and that's going to quickly just come into the human consciousness, and we're all going to be using it. Oh, this is good. And I'm sure there's going to be some issues where it won't work as well, but assuming it works how we all perceive it could, then people are going to say, hold on, I can do this on my phone, why can't I do it at work? And so the pressure is going to be on to really, really bring this stuff together. And if and on that Apple keynote, one of the big things they majored on is, we can do this because your data is in the ecosystem, and so I think that's really going to drive it in everywhere else, because we're all going to be seeing it in our daily lives on our phones, and but we're not going to be seeing it in the corporation, and we will want to see it. It makes sense to see it, but in order to get that, you have got to go through these data build steps.
Well, I mean, that's the story of technology, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, actually, email is a slightly it actually worked the opposite way around. But a lot of technology now that we have in the corporate space arose, first, in the personal space, and there just became this expectation. Well, I can do it there. Why can't I do it here?
Yeah.
So the genie's out of the bottle. It's following. The AI, the Gen AI revolution might be quite a feisty one, quite a disruptive one.
Yeah.
But the idea it somehow follows different rules from all the other technology revolutions is nonsensical.
Yeah.
It really is very much following the same trajectory. It does seem to be doing it very, very quickly. And things are moving at a rate of knots, and keeping up with that is going to be hard. I think it has a lot of the characteristics of the dot-com boom, in that there is a lot of fast failing happening.
Yeah.
There's a lot of failed investment happening. There's a lot of charlatans out there, or actually genuinely brilliant people doing brilliant things that just aren't achieving the level of cut through. There's so much, competition happening, and no one really knows where this is going to, where the dust's going to settle on this. So no one really knows where the investment's really going to find itself, and where the sort of first mature generation of Gen AI technologies is going to land. I think you can speculate a lot, but I think there's going to be carnage in the meantime, and very, very quickly there's going to be carnage. And some of the problems that we have raised here will be solved as part of that. Especially, when you think about the core of what we're talking about here, that is the vectorization of corporate memory. Well, you've got like Elasticsearch already have a vector database technology, which was a natural lateral move for them, who were already doing something quite similar, and they will be powering a fair amount of corporate search. And like Postgres has a vector database bolt on, and so on. So some of this is coming out through existing technologies. It's only a matter of time before Microsoft, give a corporate walled garden SharePoint, or some version of SharePoint or future technologies based on that. So I think this is all coming in quite quickly, but I think that it still doesn't stop the fact that there's a bunch of sort of planning. The businesses that are really going to be able to take advantage of this are the ones that are really aware that there is a technological, infrastructural, and therefore financial footprint here. To be priced in, and given the speed that this is working at, if you're going in from your, you're starting to approach your 25 planning cycle, right? You need to be planning some budget in. And where you're going to plan that? Well, it's not on prompt engineers. I think it's going to have to be much further on the infrastructure side, and that's where some of these issues are going to arise, because I don't think it is very clear how to spend that money. And I think but I do think that if you figure out where the value is to your business in terms of using Gen AI in your internal data, think about what that data is and where it sits now, and think about the fact that that's got to be tidied up, vectorized in a safe way. And quite frankly, now you could start thinking about that.
No, that's so key for me, and we know what's coming out of that conversation. Well, we've only got so much money, not everyone's got the deep pockets of Apple and Google. So, companies aren't technical companies. So you're only going to have so much money. So what does it come down to? Well, like you say, you've got the front end build out. We need to be experimenting around AI, but that's going to get to a point which many companies are already getting to, which is, well, we've got quite a few prototypes now. Look, we've got 100, Gen AI, but how do we, what's the next step? Well, as we've talked about here, you've got to get that corporate data in. Well, where are we on that? Well, that's a back end IT engineering that's been going on. How are we doing on that? And there's going to have to be a balance there. And as we know, it's going to come down to priorities. So this is really where it's key for me. Look, you're going to have to do some back end, and you need that back end and that infrastructure. You need to be building that. I mean, that's a long ongoing project in my mind. Some of these have already been going on years. It is, and they are not cheap. They require a lot of engineers. There's a lot of work to be done there. It doesn't happen in months. You count these things in years. So you've got to be thinking modular there, and you've also got to be thinking, because you want to be modular, because you want to be able to say, okay, well, look, we've got some infrastructure to build here, but we want to then be able to put on some AI on top of that, so we can then get some return on investment for that small part, even though that infrastructure build is going to have to underpin all of your data. You don't want different solutions for different parts of your business. You don't want to go back into that silo, but you do want to build out a modular one. And the way I see it as well, these technologies are changing so quickly. What you might start with as your, like kind of data fabric layer, and what you start building that now could change in 3 years' time. So you've got to be able to be in a position that what you can get out and get live and get in production and feeding some sort of Gen AI tool might be different, but you've got to be able to transport that, and transpose that to new technology in 2 to 3 years' time without having to make another massive investment. And that's always been one of the hard things for technology. But we've both seen it. Even in recent years, where companies are building out, a global data fabric, and 3 years after the start, there's still no deliverables.
Yeah.
And it's the classic IT infrastructure promise. Oh, well, there's no point in doing it unless we do it for everything. But that takes so long. By the time you get to deliver any value, your company's gone out of business.
Well, yeah, or the landscape's changed.
Yeah.
And we used, we started off building this 5 years ago on the latest, greatest, which is now massively obsolete. And we're now delivering it to great fanfare, and things have moved on. And this is going to be this Gen AI revolution is going to be a pretty big sledgehammer in the center of that type of big IT infrastructure delivery projects, because people are going to be screaming out, going, well, can you help me with this? Will platform X that you've been delivering for 3 years help us do this? And the answer is probably going to be sort of. And they're going to be like, no, you've missed the boat, right? We've sailed. So I think, I mean, there's nothing new here, right? There's some new components, but I think the core of our point here is that this is just, you may think about the things like the value that it can offer, the return on investment, all these things, the absolute step changes that are driven by these technologies. They might be transformational, they might be totally different. You can think of them totally differently, and that's cool, but the underlying challenges haven't changed at all. It's just another data engineering problem under the surface, and one that can be arguably quite thorny, quite difficult to manage, and there's not a lot of expertise out there, relating to it right now. So I think that people need to start planning for it. I think that's our core thesis here, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you can plan for it. There's going to be some trade-offs. One of the things I quite like about this is that in the crazy changing world of Gen AI at the moment, where you really don't know what it's going to look like in 3 months, well, part of that doesn't matter, because you've got a build job to do here, right? If you know that there's one part of your business that you want to get some tools into, you might not know how those tools will deliver, but you're going to know, you're going to know the data that you're going to need. You're going to know that needs to be piped in, it needs to be worked on. If it's not engineered, you can start work on that. That isn't going to change that much. And if you build it out and plan it properly, it can be layered. And yes, you might have to swap in a layer here and there, in the technology stack. But if you build it in a modular fashion, and if you've got the business buy-in, and the return on investment that you're going after, probably more important now, as we always say, than they ever were.
Yes. Well, business as usual is what we're saying. So I think we should bring this one to a close. No doubt we'll be talking more about AI in the near future.
No doubt.
But that will do for the moment.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.